Good morning, and thank you for joining me here today. We are gathered on traditional territory of Treaty 6 people, and I also would like to acknowledge Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. Yesterday, the UCP tabled Bill 8, which, if passed, would bring forward some very concerning, very unethical, and blatantly self-serving amendments to the Conflict of Interest Act. Albertans are facing significant challenges, skyrocketing rents, and a cost of living crisis. Being turned away from the doctor's office and emergency rooms, they are concerned about whether they will still be able to retire on their pension, and the list goes on and on. Yet, instead of focusing on what matters to Albertans, the UCP is prioritizing a legislation to serve their own interests instead. Bill 8 was introduced in the House late afternoon yesterday, right before a long weekend, giving us no opportunity to question them until we return from the legislative break. The main purpose of the bill is to amend the Conflict of Interest Act so that the Premier or anyone else in her cabinet and caucus can't be held accountable if she is found breaking the law right before the election. On top of that, the proposed changes would remove the legislative limit on gifts that MLAs can receive. The current value is already quite generous, a limit of $200 for a single source, $200 value gift from a single source. $200 is a significant amount of money for many Alberta families. $200 could buy groceries for a week, pay for school fees, that would otherwise stretch a family budget. It would help offset the rising cost of utilities and rent. It could fill up few gas tanks for a student in the winter, but for the UCP, a $200 limit is too low. They want to increase the limit on free perks, gifts, and handouts that benefit them just because they have the power to do so. The Act already has checks and balances in place to prevent this kind of self-serving corruption. And Section 48 of the Act requires that Conflict of Interest Act go to a committee every 5 years for a full review. This is a critical piece of public transparency. And right now, there is a motion on the table to see through this review, as has been done in past. But the UCP plot to cover its unethical tracks thickens. The bill would not be subject to that review. Simply put, the UCP is going to ignore the traditional public accountability around this act so they can line their pockets with gifts and other perks. Albertans won't get a chance to weigh in and decide what's fair and ethical. Danielle Smith and the UCP believe they know better than all of us and don't want to waste time asking Albertans for their opinions. Just like they have done with this risky plan to gamble away Albertans' pension and with their radical overhaul of our public health care. The government trying to limit the value of gifts is like allowing a teenager to set their own curfew. Sadly, we have come to expect this kind of self-serving overreach from this UCP government, seeing as they have already brought forward legislation to try and cover up the fact that the Premier herself was found guilty of breaking the law. These changes to Conflict of Interest Act are about protecting the UCP. It means less transparency and more of that good old conservative entitlement to backroom deals. This government doesn't care about the people that elected them, only themselves, and that's wrong. Albertans deserve a government that cares about them and is focused on actually making life better for everyone, not just those who pay for a seat at the UCP's head table. The Alberta NDP is committed to holding the UCP accountable. We cannot allow the UCP to manipulate our laws for personal gains. We will not support this bill, and we will fight to prevent it from being passed. We intend to put a stop to this UCP gravy train. Thank you, and I will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you're on the phone, it's *9. If you're on Zoom, it's raise hand to get in the question queue. We'll just start here in person. Thank you.
Shailan Skolsky with CTV News in Edmonton. I apologize, it's unrelated to today's announcement, but I'm wondering if you could comment on the yesterday's targeted shooting of an 11-year-old boy and his father in Edmonton.
As I was walking down for this presser, Edmonton Police was doing their press conference about it. Wasn't able to get all the detail, but in fact, it was gang-related, and the person was known to police. And it's unfortunate that an 11-year-old was caught in the harm way. But generally speaking, what we have seen in Edmonton and across this province is that there is a growing concern in our communities about gang violence, gun violence, and crimes in general. And the government has 4 years when they were in government. They keep promising things, but they have not delivered. During election, they also promised that they will hire 100 police officers. And after that, they had a huge press conference, in fact, re-announcing the same 100 police officers. And when asked in the legislature how many of those officers have been hired, an answer was 0 from Public Safety Minister Mike Alice. So we have been asking this government that instead of making just empty promises, they need to focus on preventing crime, addressing crime, and addressing the root causes of the crime. And so far, the government is, again, focused on things that benefit them, such as removing the gift limit for themselves, removing Alberta Boards and Commissions Reform Act so that they can benefit their friends and insiders. That's the kind of behavior we are seeing from this government instead of focusing on what matters to Albertan, what concerns Albertans.
Yeah, listening to that press conference from EPS, they did say that shootings are up 46% this year, and there is an increased risk to bystanders in the public. There was a daycare just next to where the shooting happened yesterday. Aside from the boots on the ground that you mentioned, what would you call for from the province in order to ease concerns around public safety and counter these gun and gang violence?
I think we have been asking this government that they need to take an approach where they consult with frontline officers, with those who know about dealing with these circumstances. But their approach always is top-down, that where they know the best. And certainly they have announced some changes. For instance, they said they will hire 100 police officers for Edmonton and Calgary. What about rural Alberta? We haven't seen those officers hired yet. And then they also need to invest in areas such as homelessness, such as addiction, and other social determinants of crime. But they're more focused on grandstanding, they're more focused on things that benefit them and their insiders, and that's really unfortunate.
Thank you. We'll go to the phone lines now. Dean, your line should be open. Or Matthew, sorry, it's Matthew. Go ahead, Matthew.
About the legislation here. I think part of what you're pushing back against is changes that mean there will be no investigation or publication of those investigations during the campaign. I'm talking about the ethics commissioner here. In fairness, that is what she herself suggested in her report on the premier. She said it put her and others in an extremely difficult position. But I'm curious if you think there's a middle way or a compromise there where we can still get some accountability in that situation without putting the commissioner or others in that awkward spot. Is there maybe a compromise we could find there?
I think what I mentioned is that every 5 years, the Conflict of Interest Act need to be reviewed pursuant to Section 48 of the Act by a committee. And there is a Government Motion 10, on the order paper that will send this act to that committee for a full review. When a bill is reviewed in the committee, there is opportunity for stakeholders, for Albertans to weigh in on those changes. And what they are doing here, that they are making these changes because they are in their interest, because Premier was caught breaking the law. And these changes may not be part of that review in that committee. They just want to push through these changes. When, I guess, the bill has that protection built in, Albertans and stakeholders have every right to weigh in and see what's ethical. And second thing that what this bill does is that it removes that $200 gift limit from the legislation. Every other province has gift limit around that $200 mark. And I can tell you that in my constituency, people are struggling to put food on table. They are struggling to pay rents. And not one person has asked me that, oh, the gift you'll receive should have higher limit. So that's the kind of out-of-touch policies this government is putting forward instead of focusing on what matters to Albertans and issues they are facing with cost of living and many other crises.
Do you have a follow-up, Matthew?
Yeah, thank you for that. Parallel to this, and you kind of touched on it there, the government is opening competition for the role of ethics and election commissioners. Just hoping for your reaction to that and how you might go about that process a bit differently than they are.
I think government, their contracts are coming to an end, but in this particular case, the ethics commissioner put forward a report where she found that Premier contravened Section 3 of the Conflict of Interest Act. She clearly broke the law, and she had also reserved the right to make further recommendation. And that's the kind of thing UCP does. When previous election commissioner was investigating them for leadership fraud, they also brought forward a piece of legislation to fire the ethics commissioner. And that investigation, I guess we are still waiting what happened. So here they could conveniently point to the contract that expires in May, but the real reason here is that ethics commissioner put forward a report clearly concluding that Premier broke the law, and that's why they are in rush to get rid of ethics commissioner and anyone who doesn't comply with their political agenda and political interests.
Thank you, Matthew. We'll go to our next caller. Dean, your line should be open.
Thanks. Yeah, Matthew asked my question. Thanks, Matthew. We didn't hear about any of this at the election. If they wanted to change the gift rules, is that something that should have been brought up to voters in the election?
Absolutely. Premier didn't campaign on changing the gifts, and as I mentioned, that people are concerned about cost of living, people are concerned about rents going through the roofs, people are concerned about their health care, their pensions, and instead of focusing anything that matters to them, they just brought this bill where they will set the gift limits behind closed doors through cabinet regulations, and then they also repealed reform of agencies, boards, and commissions so that they can pay perks to their friends and insiders. So that's completely out of touch for this government to do.
Do you have a follow-up, Dean?
Yeah, you said you're gonna fight this hard. How far are you gonna go? You've got 38 members. Are we gonna see a filibuster on this?
I think we will do everything that's available to us to put an end to UCP's gravy train. And I also urge Albertan to be loud, reach out to their UCP MLAs and ministers, and tell them that that's not acceptable. UCP needs to focus on their priorities and not their own gifts and pricey perks for their friends and insiders.
Great. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our press conference for today.